Today I'll be showing you how you can try and diagnose and fix a faulty analog stick on your game controller. As you can see from the gamepad tester output, this controller that I'm looking at here today has got an issue with the left analog stick. Specifically, it's an issue with the Y-axis of the stick, as the output is unstable when moving the stick up or down. The controller I have here is a PlayStation 4 controller, but this general procedure will apply to any game controller that uses analog sticks. Before going any further, you'll need to take the controller apart, strip it down so that you've just got the board in front of you. Once you're ready, we can start trying to diagnose the problem. So the first thing you want to look for is whether there's any dust or dirt around the stick which could be causing the issue. Dirt on the outside shouldn't be causing an issue, but it's a good idea to clean it off anyway, just to make sure it doesn't end up inside the stick. As you can see, this one's rather dirty, so I'm going to go and clean this off before going any further. Still a bit of dirt there, but it's a lot cleaner than it was. So now we're going to unclip the two potentiometers, which are these two green parts on the outside, as these are the parts responsible for allowing the controller to detect movement. You can use a small blade or something similar to just wedge it open to begin with, and once you've started to open it up, you should just be able to open it with your hand, as I've done here. Now you can remove the inner piece of the potentiometer, which is the part that rotates when you move the stick. This one looks nice and clean inside, which isn't really a surprise, as this one controls the X-axis on the stick, which seemed to be working fine. So with the second one open now, we can take a closer look and see if there's any differences between the two. Right, so in this stick you can quite clearly see there's physical damage in there. There looks like there's some gouge marks in the material. So this potentiometer is going to need replacing. If you're lucky, you might find a bit of dust or dirt in there, but no physical damage, in which case if you give it a clean, that might be enough to fix it. But if there's physical damage, as we see here, it's going to need replacing. You'll also want to check the piece that we removed earlier from the centre, just to make sure there's no dust or debris on there. Also check that the outer metal ring is smooth, and it should just have a little notch in it just above the centre. You can see that this one's covered in the material, which has obviously came off the other part of the potentiometer, so again this part's going to need replacing. I've just got this cheap board holder here that I'm going to use to try and hold this board. It's not the best one for the job because of the taller parts which are around the outside of the board, but it'll do the job. I'll be using a set of soldering tweezers to bridge these pads together, but you could just use a normal soldering iron if you just add a good amount of solder to each of the joints first. You're effectively looking to bridge all three joints together so that you can just pull the part out and worry about cleaning up the pads later on. As you can see, I'm just letting the heat soak in for a few seconds. I've got my iron on a nice high temperature. One of the pins is connected to a ground plane, so you do want to make sure you get a good amount of heat in there, and just be patient and give it a few seconds to make sure the solder's fully melted. You can see that it didn't take too long to do, and I find this method a pretty easy way of removing the part. You could also try desoldering the pins beforehand, but because of how close together they are, I just find this way easier. Next, you'll want to clean up the pads on the board to make it easier to fit the new part. First thing you'll want to do is add a bit of fresh solder onto each joint. That'll just aid in the heat transfer and make it a bit easier to get out the existing solder. To remove the solder, I'm just going to be using a cheap handheld solder sucker, though you could use solder braid if you prefer. You'll want your iron to be fairly high. I've got mine currently set to 360 degrees. I'll just zoom in a bit more so you can see a bit better, because that's the first one already done, and as you can see it was pretty easy to do. And there's the second one done, and now this last one is the one that's connected to ground, so I'm expecting I'll probably need to turn the temperature up, but let's give it a go anyway. And it's not done it, so we are going to need a bit more heat in this, so I'll turn my iron up to 400 degrees and give that a go, And I'm also just going to hold the soldering iron a little bit longer to give the heat a bit more time to soak into the joint. Right, so that's got it this time. So if we just take a look at the board now, you can see all those holes look nice and clean, and we can get the new part ready to install. Here's the part I'm going to be using to replace the old potentiometer on this controller. As you can see, this one's black, but it is functionally identical to the original. It might be a little bit tight, but you should just be able to slot this piece in and then solder it in place. So this part's in place now, so I'm just going to add a bit of solder to each of the 3 joints. Just bear in mind that that ground pin probably will need a bit more heat than the others if you want to make a good solid joint. A quick check back with the gamepad tester confirms that this controller is now fixed. Hopefully you'll have the same result with your controller. So I hope you liked this video, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll stick around for the next one.